Hi guys and welcome. This is Jen Gaeta Siciliano, artist, memoir writer, bipolar psychiatric survivor, and your host of Not As Crazy As You Think podcast, the place that offers an alternative perspective on mental illness, highlighting creativity, non-conventional healing, and breaking on through to the other side. If you are ready for a new narrative on the mental realm that celebrates crazy and cool without penalty, then Not As Crazy As You Think is for you. Hello, this is Jen Gaeta Siciliano, your host of Not As Crazy As You Think podcast. Today we are starting season 4, and I'm thrilled to have a guest back who was awesome, and she's doing amazing things and moving forward with her goals. It's Emma Hames here visiting us again, musician, artist, filmmaker, creator of the music for the film Playing with Life, the soundtrack, and founder of Cassette Monkeys, which we'll talk about. She's a promoter of health sovereignty, informed consent, and creative therapy healing. She was a guest in season 3, episode 10, and I'll have that link in the description for this particular episode so that you can check that out too. Emma, thank you so much for returning. I'm thrilled that we could have another conversation and take at this. How are you?
Thank you so much, Jen. I'm also thrilled to be back, and I'm doing well, thank you. All is good. Just to say, we have building work going on the flat right now, so if you hear drilling in the background, I do apologize for that. But yeah, I'm all good. I'm all good. I feel like a lot has happened since we last chatted.
Well, for people who don't know what your story is, you've had a terrible experience with benzodiazepine prescription and what it did to you. So just give us a little background for those who don't know.
Yeah, sure. So about 10 years ago, I was training to become a teacher, and I contracted a virus, which I now know was a kind of coronavirus. I've had to say to people now that I hold no responsibility for COVID. I was not the first. And I basically felt straight away that something was very different with this virus, couldn't breathe properly, and sort of felt something snap in my body, which is very, very weird. So obviously I went to the doctors, as we all do in these situations, and they told me that nothing was wrong. It was just in my head. Fast forward a year later, I'd got through my degree and I'd graduated, but I went from being one of the highest performing students and having top marks to they almost failed me. And I was saying to them, it's because I can't breathe properly. But I had no validation from doctors to back that up. So I then had an opportunity to move to the south of France. And I thought, okay, well, if it's just stress, then moving to the south of France will solve everything and everything will be fine. Of course it didn't. And 3 months into living there, doctors found my lung capacity to be at 60%. And I developed a kind of asthma off the back of this virus. So because I'd gone a year without breathing properly, and we now know that COVID and coronaviruses can actually cause anxiety through chemical shifts in the brain, I developed quite severe anxiety. So I was having panic attacks. All my senses were overstimulated. And I was put on a benzodiazepine. Now, I had no idea what this was at the time. As naive as it sounds, I honestly thought it was something as benign as cough medicine. Even that, I'm like, is cough medicine benign? Now that I've been through this, I'm questioning everything. But I was on it for 4 years, and I asked to come off it within a few months because I just felt this sense of being drugged up, and I didn't like it. I didn't think I needed to be on drugs. So they actually increased my dosage. I ended up being on the highest dose over 4 years, and I started having heart palpitations, which I'd never had before. And in 2016, I came back to the UK from France, and in the first doctor's appointment there, they told me that I should have been on the drug for a week maximum. So I cold turkeyed, having no idea of the risks. I still didn't know what a benzodiazepine was at that point. None of the doctors had explained this to me. I had just had no awareness. And I thought I might have a few weeks or a few months withdrawal. Sort of like Requiem for a Dream, where Jared Leto is going through that hellish time. I thought, okay, this is going to be horrible, but at least I'll be free from this thing that I shouldn't have been on. But I wasn't expecting it to last 5 years. So I cold turkeyed, and my whole life turned upside down. And basically yeah, I just had this really severe injury for a long time. So, and it was only 2019 that I found out what a benzodiazepine was and could start sort of putting the pieces of the puzzle together, and realizing just how many people around the world being affected by the same thing.
There's many people. In fact, 120 million, right, in the US alone that are on benzos, and many more other psych meds out there who people are strung up on. They may want to get off, but there's no guidance for that. And obviously getting off causes nervous system damage from what you've experienced.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the major issues. Not only are these drugs extremely potent, but people just don't, I say people, I mean patients and doctors are just not aware of the risks.
Right.
And how to, and of course, some people are, and the awareness is growing, but it's not enough. It didn't protect us, and it hasn't protected many other people. It wasn't enough, and it wasn't soon enough.
Right.
And as you say, the result is potentially injury for X amount of time. No one knows. I still don't. I mean, I know, as we've talked about, we know we're recovering, but we don't know how that translates into for other people. We don't know how long it takes to make a full recovery.
Right.
Can we have another medication? If I get an ear infection, like this ear is blocked right now because of swimming, if that turns into an infection or something, can I take an antibiotic, or is that going to give me another 5-year stint in hell? And all these things we have to sort of consider. So yeah, I think informed consent and awareness is so important so we can avoid this happening.
Right. Because most doctors do not give anything like that. There's no informed consent. There's no exit plan. There's no real communication as to how dangerous these things are long term. And it seems as though everyone just kind of like just bought into this, which, we know how it's gotten there. So much of his money generated, and, saving the medical professional face because they are doing the wrong thing and they still want to be considered the experts. So it's something that we are trying to fight on so many levels. And you are fighting it on incredible levels through creativity and community building. I want to talk a little bit about your experience with Cassette Monkeys. Now, explain again what that is, or I should say how far you've taken it. I know that at the time you were working on this NFT collection, and it's a brand and a movement trying to help support the billions dealing with mental health challenges. Now, how does that happen?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. Like Cassette Monkeys just became its own thing. I sort of envision these little like animated cassette monkeys just working behind the scenes on creating themselves, because it's just evolved quite naturally. But Cassette Monkeys originally was going to be an NFT collection to essentially build community and crowdfund the documentary film Playing with Life. And I realized the power of community building around NFTs, and I thought that was really interesting and sort of worth looking into. And so I came up with Cassette Monkeys, and I thought it could be a really cute, fun way to kind of deal with very serious issues in a more lighthearted way. And it's just started evolving into a startup and business in its own right that will have a sort of business layer to it, and then a charity layer to it as well, so that we can not only create a sustainable and scalable business, but also give access to those that have been harmed in some way by pharmaceuticals, a chance to access those services for free or for a very heavily discounted cost, or a mixture of both, depending on what we end up offering, and really just be a community and a hub for people to feel that they can access things that could turn their lives around for better.
I am definitely of the ilk. I'm older than you. So, like this metaverse thing, the Web3 thing, like it's totally brand new to me, and I haven't like kept up on it, So I understand it's like it's a community building thing. So it's kind of its own metaverse. Is that how it works? And like people come into it and they could be part of these services and talks and initiatives and stuff like that.
Yeah, that is what we're now working on. We're working on a prototype for our own metaverse community, where it will be this virtual hub and landscape. I mean, quite literally and figuratively in terms of mountains, forests, lakes. But then in addition to that, this virtual sort of bar and rooftop lounge area. So we can have things like gigs, exhibitions, breathwork classes, meditation classes, business development classes. So we are leaning into becoming a kind of label for musicians and artists to be able to support them in getting what they want out of life and out of their professional and personal development. So we're now facilitating, or looking at how we can facilitate a 1-year development program for musicians and artists to come on board and support them. But we also know, so firstly, there's one thing that I'm not sure I mentioned last time, and there's a huge crossover between mental health, pharma harm, and creativity.
Mm-hmm.
Rollingstone.com, I think, said that 73% of musicians have some kind of mental health challenge.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine the number's even higher. And so I think that's an important crossover. And I think in today's society, paradoxically, with the internet, there are so many opportunities, but it's perhaps harder than ever for a musician or an artist to actually make a name for themselves. If you don't have a pot of money or a rich uncle or any of the above, to kind of get up and running. And I think for me, Web3, it's so new for everybody. I'm still learning. Everybody on the team's still learning. Everybody I know that's made a Web3 business is still learning. It's so new for everybody. But I think one of the very exciting things about it is it has a chance to open up opportunities for people to actually make a living and find their community with what they do. So there's a lot of crossovers here between sort of decentralized finance, mental health, creativity. And I think another important aspect of this is, even though we're a creative brand and we're all about, our new tagline is creativity is the new medicine, came up with by our COO, Leandro. So yeah, I think that really sums up kind of what we're about. But also important to note that not everybody labels themselves as creative. Not everyone feels confident to say, I'm a musician, or I'm an artist, or I'm a photographer.
True.
And really it's about having a two-way street where we can say that, or we can invite everyone to be a part of that and find what is their creative thing if they'd like to, because I do strongly believe that creativity in itself is a form of sort of health sovereignty, where we have control over it. It's very personal to us. It's universal, but personal. And so that's why we've got these sort of different tiers of things going on, so that anyone can be a part of it if they just want to sort of access the things that we can offer.
So these tiers, are they like investment tiers, like you buy in, or like how does that work?
Well, I just mean in very sort of general sense between the business and the charity, the sort of for-profit, non-for-profit. But there are also investment tiers. So we're just actually working out our sort of ground floor investment opportunities for people, because it's being a startup. At some point, obviously, you need investment, but it's very challenging. I had a chat with somebody yesterday who's an angel investor, really nice guy, looking to support female founders. And he said to me, it's just so difficult for female founders because the consensus is that women can't run businesses.
Wow.
This is coming directly from someone who's in that world.
Amazing.
And so that in itself is interesting to learn about. But I think for me, why I originally looked at NFTs is the crowdfunding element, the fact that you can share a vision and a mission with lots of people who are sort of mini angel investors. I find that really interesting. And so, yeah, the NFT community aspect to it has now become sort of phase one of a startup rather than an end in itself.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah, because it seems like it's grown and it's built momentum, and there's so many people that you've met. I mean, do you think that this NFT thing has just opened doors for you that you might not have stumbled into if it was just, you creating the film, say?
100%. Yeah. The Web3 space is a really interesting space. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think it's so new and it's so innovative in itself. And there's a lot of innovation that therefore is growing from that you get a certain kind of mentality, I think, in that space where people, they do just want to help each other. They want to learn, they're excited about what can happen. And I think everyone supporting each other in that space means that there's more success for the industry in total. So it's very supportive, very collaborative, and yeah, I've met some incredibly interesting people, and that's kind of what I spent most of my time doing, is just working behind the scenes on strategizing and networking, and that in itself, after 5 years of isolation, to a large degree, has been quite a journey, quite a short space of time.
Yeah, it's amazing. I find it to be so incredible whenever you talk about it, because I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's people are responding and you're getting somewhere with this. I mean, not that I had any doubt, because you were just so, focused and you had that ability to take the concept and take it to one step at a time and then to the next level. But I don't know, it's just I feel, somebody, like I said, who's like kind of old school, like myself, being able to capitalize on I guess, something that's, growing and kind of transforming as we speak, this whole world, this virtual world and this blockchain technology. Like, it's amazing that you were able to capture this at just the right time, that you are trying to, launch another dream, and it's so beautifully complementary. I just, I think it's very unique. There's not that many people doing this.
Yeah, it's I mean, the guy that I spoke to yesterday, he did sort of say you're kind of ahead of the curve with what you're doing, which is great. But it's also, I mean, I've always had this metaphor in my head of sort of getting off the beaten track, and you're chopping things down and you're getting cut because it's the untrodden path. And there's a lot of challenge that comes with that, obviously, especially when coming out of benzo withdrawal. I'm still, as you know, there's still elements with that going on that makes it a challenge. I get brain fog a lot, and decision making is a huge one, where I'm just like, I don't know what coffee I want, or not coffee. I don't have coffee at the moment, but just even sort of fairly minimal tasks like that, or sort of low impact decision making. But when it comes to actually building a business, obviously it's another level. So it's a challenge, but I think that's also why I jumped into it, because I think sometimes you just have to go for something, even if it's not always going to be plain sailing, and you are going to get cuts and bruises, metaphorically speaking, and you are going to sometimes have doubts and have all these emotions. And I think, but that's life. And I think you have to make that decision with yourself. Am I going to go for something where it might be slow some weeks, or I might fail, but am I going to feel better about at least having tried than not? So thank you for saying all of that as well.
Yeah, no, it's very impressive. I mean, it gives me a lot of hope, because I'm thinking, wow, anything is possible, because it's just so almost intangible, because it's in the virtual world to me. You know what I mean? It's new. It's something that, to be on the front lines, like, or really to be, you're the leader. You're showing other creatives what's possible. I know that there are a lot of young, talented, amazing artists who do a lot of NFTs. You know what I mean? Like, that's very popular right now. But taking it to the next level, where you're building a community and, a whole world. I mean, that's, to me, like, that's definitely the way to build community, because you can't do it alone, right? You need so many other helpers with this.
You do. And that's been a really nice part of the experience so far. We now have a small team working on this. And I think just to have that sort of camaraderie, working towards a bigger cause and a bigger mission. And even just in some of the networking calls, I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but I mean, I laugh because it's sort of disbelief and also not disbelief, but the amount of networking calls I've had where I'll be chatting away with somebody and they're like, so what is a benzodiazepine? It's not Xanax or anything, is it? And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what it is. It's the Valium, it's the Xanax, etc. And we'll just be discussing it, and they'll sort of say, oh, well, I've been on it for a few weeks. I already feel quite rough. I might come off it. And I'm sort of saying, oh, just make sure you don't cold turkey, because obviously it can kill you. And they're sort of like, what did you say? I didn't know that was a thing. So just even ironically through building this, the sort of opportunities to share awareness around this is pretty incredible. So yeah, it's a hell of a journey, and I feel like we're just at the start still, but it just goes to prove what collectively we're doing is still really needed. And it's gonna be, as I think we've discussed before, the exponential sort of ongoingness with this is really a thing.
And recently I saw this thing, Robert Whitaker, the one who's done Mad in America. I
hadn't realized that was who had created that, but thank you.
He wrote the book Mad in America, and then they created a foundation around it, and he's like president of the foundation. And anyway, he does a lot of speaking too. And he was I think it was Denmark that he was in, and he was speaking and telling everybody the truth. And anyway, somebody from the audience raised their hands, and she's like, I'm a psychologist and I worked with many psychiatrists, and I'm not sure that they are trying to hurt people. She's like, I don't buy into this. She goes, and like, what is your agenda? And I'm thinking, it's really not about that. It's not about, oh, these are the bad guys. And the bottom line is it's this information that's not being discussed honestly. Why would it be so bad for a psychiatrist to say, well, these drugs can be dangerous, Mm-hmm. I can offer you this, or, see, the problem is, the bottom line is it's the biochemical theory. They really believe it. The psychiatrists believe that it's a chemical thing, that these things, even though that's been disproven in terms of, chemical imbalances, the actual drugs cause the imbalances. Like, it's so shocking to me that here it is, we're still discussing things in the medical arena that are not true. And, there's so many people who have suffered. Robert Whitaker, anyway, in response was saying, I'm trying to get the information out there for all the people who have suffered and they're not being listened to. And, I, being one of those people, I'm just like, I can't even believe that I'm still in a position where people think it's about, we have to defend the psychiatrists because, they don't mean any harm. For a professional to be like, well, I'm going to stand by this treatment, even though it's harmed half the people that have been taking it. How could you, say that in good conscience as a medical professional that this is okay?
For me, it's no different than finding out that, I don't know, let's say this psychiatrist that asked the question to Robert Whitaker, if she found out that her sister, her daughter had been shot by somebody, and then found out it was the chief of police that did it. And then somebody else comes along and says, but, he's trained for this.
Right.
And he's a high standing member of society. So let's have a discussion on how we protect him.
Right.
Those feelings that she would feel in that moment, I would bet is what all of us that have been harmed by these feel. It's the same situation.
Exactly. And
it's very similar. I see a lot of similarities with the Me Too movement and abuse in all industries, and when people sort of stand up for the perpetrators and say, yes, but he's the star of the soccer team, so how do we keep his sentence to a minimum? That story. And I wish I had the answers. I honestly think it's just wanting ignorance to be bliss. Mm-hmm. I think it's fear. I think people need to feel like their narrative is the true one, because the alternative is they don't want to deal with that. That's stressful to think about. That's scary to think about.
Yeah.
Those people must be in the wrong with their agenda and their narrative. And I honestly don't know how we deal with that, other than sort of supporting ourselves as a community, but also working with allies of the community that might not have been through it themselves, but who are empathetic, who understand, and see the problem. And I think that, honestly, I think that's for me where the film and creativity as well means a lot to me, is I feel like that is a universal language, music, art, film, in a way that kind of ironically, us speaking even the same native language, I actually think that sometimes communicating through film, through music, through art can have more of an impact than just sharing dialogue. So that's my hope as well. And I hope that as we continue to share the messages through various formats, there will just be this critical mass of understanding, and somebody going, oh, well, I didn't believe Robert when he was on stage, but now I've seen this book by Jen and this film by Emma. Maybe they can't all have their own agendas.
No, right.
They can't all be crazy. So yeah.
You know, it's interesting because there are a lot of intersecting, overlapping, interest groups. And I'm sure that you've met many different ones as well, because you've spoken to so many people to get, involved with this whole world of yours. Now, what do you find in terms of like the intersectional interests? How have they popped up?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question.
Because it's like myself, I want to reach out to more allies. And I'm thinking, so many people who I know are the prescribed harm people, you know what I mean? Or the people who have suffered from prescribed harm. So it's just, I know that there's people who, if they understood the deal, and like you said, maybe they haven't suffered from it, but if they understood the layers of this issue, they would probably be on board.
I think so. And I think it just comes down to communication. And that's kind of, in a way, it shouldn't be that way, that the responsibility is on us to communicate effectively. It should just be a case of, this is what happens, full stop. But it's not. We have that challenge. I think there's huge crossovers, and I think really there are two major crossovers that I see. And the first is mental health. Every single human on the planet deals with mental health to one degree or another. And I think especially after the pandemic, I think especially considering what's going on in the world today, there's so much stress and anxiety. And I think the peripheral effects of that are going to last for some time. And, people are losing their jobs and worried about energy rises and cost of living and all these things. So I think first and foremost, it might be our story that we've been injured by these drugs, but everyone has a vested interest in this. Every single person is at risk from this. And I think just that in itself should be like the biggest incentive for people to at least prick their ears up and go, wait a second, this is happening. How is this happening? Why is this happening? How do we do something about it? And I think the second thing is just humanity. I mean, seeing what's going on in Ukraine, I would guess that the majority of us have never, perhaps don't have links to Ukraine, perhaps have never been, but we have enough sort of humanity to say this is wrong, and whatever we can do, we would do. So I think, that's kind of how I see it. There are obviously people out there that do have those reactions, that are ignorant, that are just not understanding it and coming up with their own narratives. But I think my experience has been it's been more on the other side. I don't know if that's been different for you in the States. I don't know if it's a different sort of understanding there. How has it been for you?
Yeah, it's a good point, because I think that generally when I hear people who speak from Europe and, the UK, and they seem to be more hopeful of change. And that could just be my interpretation. But I do know that America is to me, like a standstill. Like, we're not going anywhere with this because of big pharma. And, you know, when you think of the corporations, I mean, and actually, when you hear people speak about the problems in other countries, they always turn to the American Psychiatric Association as being one of the biggest promoters of these theories, this narrative, this, you know, the way they handle or push into the global mental health movement, these medications. I mean, you know, you're able to in India, like get this stuff over the counter, like not even get it prescribed. So like they really care. They don't care. This is a business. You know what I mean? It's not about properly treating anybody if it's hurting people. So, you know, my feeling, I always think about like when you treat cancer, right? Like I always say, like, if the treatment is worse than the thing itself, like nobody wants cancer treatment. But if you're in a position where you might, you know, you give into it because you're like, oh my gosh, you know, what's the potential outcome could be that I die if I don't get it. Mm-hmm. That's not, see, a lot of times they point to this idea that the meds are saving everybody from suicide. Meanwhile, half the times they actually cause suicidal ideation.
Right. It's
like this relayed story that they are the experts who save. It's the exact opposite.
Yeah. And I think the other problem is that you do have people in the medical institution and industry that are well-meaning, that do want to help people. And that's why they got into it. So you've got a lot of people who like, and that's how we've grown up. We've grown up with the notion that doctors are heroes. And for a large majority or a percentage, I can tell you, they are. But that doesn't discount what is going on and the other side of it. And I don't know what the answer is other than we do what we can. And I think awareness. Awareness is everything. Telling our stories and just knowing the truth with that. Yeah. Just people can think what they want. Like, right. I've kind of just got to the point where I'm like, fuck it. This is the truth. This is what's happened. Your interpretation of that in some ways is none of my business. I would just like it to get to a point where there's some kind of justice and fairness with this context. And that people aren't being harmed and having their lives turned upside down or killing themselves or going through torture at the hands of people that they trusted in.
Right. I think the future of psychiatry is really in deprescribing. If they could just get past the sense that, oh, I put in all this money into my medical, my medical degree.
Yeah. Yeah. And in some ways I'm empathetic to that because that must be really shit to know that you've, gosh, am I contributing to this?
Right.
So I do empathize with that. Someone close to me works with medical things, we'll say, and said to me the other day, sometimes I wonder if what I'm doing is contributing to the things that have harmed you. And it's so I get it. And I think it's the system at large, and it's the people who have been aware of what's happening and not only allowed it to continue, but fueled the continuation of it. That's the problem. It's not, and I think this is part of the challenge that we have, and why sometimes there's a negative reaction from people, is there's this sense that we're just out to like fight all the doctors and medicine is bad and pharma is bad, and that's not the case. Right. But again, it doesn't discount from what's happening. And right. I think for me, it was one thing to realize what had happened with these drugs, but then to go from that to the realization of, I honestly thought that as soon as I started talking about it, that somehow there'd be this sort of almighty like change of events, and I don't know, I don't even know what I was expecting, but I thought front page news, and like I was just so naive to think that somehow overnight things would change and that everybody would suddenly understand, and that isn't the case.
Yeah, I get you on that one. I feel the same way in a way, because I know when my book gets out there, sometimes I have these ideas that it's like all of a sudden everyone's gonna be like, oh my God, thank you for waking us up, Yeah, to a point, I might help if you wake up, but it's really just plugging away, I guess, at chipping away at these, resculpting these narratives, and it takes a long time.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, as adorable as we can be, it's hard to sometimes change everybody's minds.
And I think that's
overnight.
why, I honestly, I think that's why it's important to channel these things in a way that is sustainable and fun for us, and also for the people that are on the receiving end of it.
Right.
Because it is heavy. It is like, it's fucking depressing when you think about what is actually happening and what has happened to people and the effects of that. It's not an easy subject matter. And I do think as well, I think it's just human psychology. You can hear, I mean, with marketing, you can hear, or you can see an ad one time, and I can't remember the numbers, but it's something like the 7th time they'll see it, they'll maybe consider buying the product, something like that. So I think it really is just this continuation of effort and trying different things. And maybe somebody would watch my film or listen to a podcast and go, oh, that's kind of interesting. Or they'll listen to Robert Whitaker on stage. Oh, that's kind of interesting. I'm a bit skeptical, but maybe then they'll read your book and they'll go, and that will be the thing that then
right, true,
gets the understanding. And
that's why the more people who can talk about this information, the better. I mean, I want to encourage everybody out there who has had any kind of negative stuff to get out there and say something, because it's true. I think the more things are heard and repeated, and suddenly that click occurs.
Yeah, and it just revalidates what's been said by other people.
And you know what? And I thank you for taking the time. I like to push people in this direction, but I thank you for taking the time to talk about the seriousness of it, because, it's not something that should be ignored, especially by people like us who have been harmed. It's something that I think it's so often needs to be a reminder to people as often as possible, because, the second you ignore it, everyone forgets about it. You know what I mean? Like, it's definitely, but again, you are taking your creativity and making a story, and stories and music, especially music, is one thing that is truly universal. I mean, more so than even art, because it's just so, I mean, art in digital art more, I think more than fine art sometimes, but music can hit on so many levels. People just connect. And also film. I mean, I think that you really are going in the right direction with trying to get more traction for this message based on the creative sources that you're going into. Let me ask you, tell us a little bit about the film process. Like, what is your timeline in terms of when you're going to be working on the music, when you're going to be doing the recording, or do you have a team of filmers? Like, what's that looking like?
Yeah, so my hope is to get it into full production next year. So right now I'm sort of documenting what I can as I go. So this could be footage for the film, for example, like any sort of meeting that I have, not any, but some. And yeah, just sort of doing what I can now to document. But one of the challenges for me has been juggling and balancing Cassette Monkeys, the film, the music, recovery. So that's, yeah. And so right now I'm trying to do sort of one thing at a time that will then open up the door for everything else. So that focusing on Cassette Monkeys, so that then we can, so the idea is that once we sell out Cassette Monkeys, we would then have the funds to hire a full team of people for the film as well as Cassette Monkeys. So we'd have this ecosystem of sort of creativity and support, with the film being a sort of part of the marketing arm with that, I suppose, and filtering into that, but have individual teams working on it. So my hope is that we can get into full production next year. And I would like it to be distributed, or for it to be released end of next year, Q1 of 2024, which is quite ambitious. But I mean, everything's there. The planning is there. It's just a case of actually filming the huge part of it, which is the tour. So you've got the tour element as well, which is this whole other thing that needs to be organized.
Are you in stages for organizing that yet?
Well, the stage is similar to the film. Once we sort of get Cassette Monkeys up and running, then we'll have the resources to hire, a tour manager and really get that running. But again, that's what's exciting with Cassette Monkeys and the community aspect, is they can be a part of that. Yeah. So it can be this symbiotic relationship of sort of co-organizing, co-involvement. So yeah, it's scary in some respects because it's reliant on Cassette Monkeys. I could spend 6 months working on Cassette Monkeys, and if something doesn't happen the way that I'd like it to, then I'm 6 months behind on everything else. But obviously I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't have faith in it. So that's the plan. It's a crazy plan. Sometimes I said to my dad the other day, am I crazy? And he was like, yes, you are. But anyone who's ever created something has to have been to some degree. So.
Is he supportive of your journey, where you're at with this coming forward?
He's very supportive. And I don't think he would mind me saying that I think he has some guilt around the situation. He has apologize and as I think we've talked about before, my family just believed the doctors, that there was nothing wrong, so that support wasn't there. And I think it's really surprised him sort of coming out of this and becoming a well person again after years of not being. And this is a prime example of what we were just talking about. I think through him hearing your story or Heather's story or somebody else's story, I think that's kind of awakened in him. Even though I'm his daughter, even though I'm related to my family members, I actually don't think it was necessarily enough even for them to fully understand it. And it's when you start getting other stories coming through that it kind of affirms your own story. So yes, he's supportive. He's been he really believes in everything and very excited by everything. So it's good to have that.
That's great. Yeah, that is good to have that. My mother too. She always believed the doctors, I mean, we always had this kind of relationship. So then when they told her about me, that was something that she just believed in. My father just went along with the flow. But now suddenly, because there's some people talking about, wait, I was harmed too, she can relate. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, this isn't just like in my daughter's mind. You know what I mean? In her bipolar mind. It's like suddenly, oh, wait, this is a real thing. So yeah, it does. Again, I think it's just so darn important, because as I was speaking at that thing recently, I was sitting there thinking to myself, if somebody else is in the audience, like I was years ago, I'm like afraid and not knowing where to turn, and just hearing that someone else has a perspective that's questioning authority, that's enough, quite possibly, to give me the hope, to move forward.
And I think that's another thing that's important to remind ourselves, and to anyone else listening that has found friction or resistance in one form or another, that even if there are 10 people that are booing you off stage or whatever the reaction is, or questioning, I'm not sure psychiatrists to blame here, whatever the narrative is, there may well be one person whose life gets saved.
Yeah, right.
From the information we're sharing. So I think we just something to keep in mind and always have that balance, because I've definitely found that, just as I say, even through Cassette Monkeys work, have found that I've been able to sort of warn people to not cold turkey, or maybe have a look at that drug that you're on. And so and also I had a conversation with somebody the other day who actually ended up on a benzodiazepine because of the COVID vaccine in the UK.
Really?
No, not in the UK, sorry, Australia. And so she told me that she was actually quite skeptical of benzodiazepines before she went on it, but that wasn't enough for her to feel confident saying no, because the doctor was saying, oh, ignore that information. And then her partner was sort of saying, listen to the doctor, they're the professional.
Right.
And I think that's where speaking in human to human form, that was eye-opening for me. The information is out there. People have some awareness, but even just reading it on a screen or something hasn't been enough. It wasn't enough to save this person from their injury. So I think there's just another dimension of impact by telling it in this way.
Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, we're dealing with a highly authoritative field. Anybody in medicine we always defer to them because, we're not doing all the research on every problem that we have in our bodies. So we're trusting when we go to a specialist or a doctor that they can help us and put us on the right path of healing. But it is a funny thing when science is done inappropriately and people are hurt because of it. We want to put our faith in this scientific studies and research, but if it's done in ways that are just pushing the profits of the pharmaceutical companies without any regard to proper research, showing that that they get rid of people who don't take well to benzos in those research studies. They don't use them in the studies. So it's so twisted, you know what I mean, the way things are done. However, as you said, if people just find it in their hearts to question when things don't seem right, I think that's one of the keys, because, it really takes a lot to question this authority. It's not often done. It's hard for me to, when you put it like that, it's hard for me to even say, yeah, definitely question, because, we want to trust our doctors.
Mm-hmm.
Many, many journalists out there right now writing about this stuff. And there's a lot of good ones in the UK, like Dr. James Davies and Joanne Moncrief, and so many great people who in the mental health arena who are trying to show, the problems.
Yeah. And I think there are sort of some official sources as well. I think Benzo Information Coalition is a great one to look at for people to refer to. Because I think that's part of the narrative against what we're saying and against sort of the truth around this, is people will then say, well, you can't just listen to strangers on the internet over your doctor. I know, that's crazy. And it's like, well, actually what's crazier is doctors harming, killing people unintentionally, hopefully, and then actually the things that can save you is some random forum on the internet. That's certainly what would have prevented me being harmed, and I think the same for you. So I think it's such a weird one, but yeah, it's that there's a lot more source of help and information out there on the world web than probably any doctor that you would go to. And I know that from personal experience as well, even with some empathetic doctors. As I think I've said to you before, I might have said it in the last show that I did with you, that one doctor said to me, you've been poisoned by these drugs, and there's nothing we can do. She literally said, I hold my hands up, there is nothing we can do. So what do you do from that point? I know. Do you just go home and say, oh, well, it's years of my life that have been to some degree taken away by doctors, I'll just get on with it? You can't do that. You need to find support, and that support is available. That information is available online, but it is a case of having a good filtering system on as well. So I think some semi-established sources are maybe a good place to start for anyone who is new to seeking out that information. And maybe if there's people that you can do it with who you trust, who can help kind of just have a bit of a soundboarding session and say, oh, I found this bit of information. Do you think that's worth looking into? That, I think that could be helpful if people have access to that as well.
Absolutely. And you found so many people on social media and so many different people who were able to help and discuss along the way, right? I mean, that's your search.
I've been really thankful for that, and that definitely helped me through the tougher times. especially when no one around you. There have been moments where literally nobody around me except maybe one or two friends who were thousands of miles away. You just didn't have that support, that understanding. So I think social media is a great one, and community is so important, because you're linking up with people who are not only empathetic, but actually understand what you're going through. And that in itself is very validating and very healing. And that's kind of what we want to do with Cassette Monkeys, is help facilitate that community growth full of like-minded people that have gone through similar things. And
coming back to that, I mean, in terms of getting the community together and allies, not just people who have lived experience, I think that you're doing a tremendous job with trying to make that happen, because it's what's needed. If we can see that community is all encompassing, it could be everyone supporting everyone in the name of health, in the name of mental health, in the name of creativity. And right, these are positives. They don't have to be negatives. I mean, it's so hard not to be negative. It is. And I think that's another crossover in terms of how are other people potentially going to listen to our stories. Isn't it just better to live in a healthy, happy world filled with healthy, happy people, compared to knowing what's going on next door and this person's being tortured because of the medication that they took? Like, isn't it better that we all just live in that first version of society? And I think I think that's what's important for me, is building a community of people where there's that shared ethos of, we might not have been harmed by these, but we certainly don't agree with it, and we want to help, and we want there to be a sense of hope and positivity. Well, it's a hopeful day, I think, because, like I said, when I was looking for this stuff, and I've been on this stuff for 27 years. So when I was looking for support, there was absolutely nobody. I mean, and I just, I was put on these things, but when there was no internet. So to think that, now it's like, oh, you could get your own information. Like, that's still relatively new yes, I haven't been that out of sorts. I did plug into the internet into the late 90s. But the thing is, bottom line is, it's a different world, and now it's possible. And I don't think it could have been possible before now. Mm-hmm. So we should, as you say, really important. Yes, put your filters on when you go into the world of the internet to find this information. But the bottom line is, you have to trust yourself. If you don't feel good on these things, or if you feel hesitant about getting on them, trust that there's something gnawing at you that you should connect to first before an outside authoritative source, especially when it's questionable. Yes. So I think it's great advice.
I 100% agree. I think I would say gut intuition and the power of numbers. And by that, I mean, get different opinions.
Yes.
Even if it's your spouse, your child, your parent, they might mean well, and they might be sort of really, really pushing the narrative of trust your doctor because they care, because they think it's the right thing to do. It doesn't necessarily mean it is the right thing to do.
Right.
And I think if you power of numbers, but from a variety of sources as well, because you're basically using that to then guide your intuition. If you've got 10, 20 people or 10, 20 articles that you've read around the issue or around that drug that your doctor is maybe wanting to prescribe you, then at least you've done your sort of due diligence and your research to then make your own decision. And you just really have to stand on your own, firmly on your own 2 feet and say, this is what I'm deciding. I've decided it because of this. And try and educate people around you if they're not sort of welcoming of that decision, and say, well, this is why I've done it. And if you care about me, then you would probably agree that, I shouldn't do the thing that's risky or riskier. So it's a challenge, but I think, again, that's why community is so important, because if we have that support system and that education through shared experience, then that can really help people make informed decisions that they can't make in the doctor's office by and large.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Emma. So let's make sure everybody could get in touch with you and follow you so that they could keep up to date with how this is all developing. How can they learn about Cassette Monkeys?
All right. So Cassette Monkeys is just at Cassette Monkeys. So I think it's capital C, capital M. And that's on Twitter. And we have a Discord as well, which you can access through the Twitter. And the website is cassette-monkeys.com. So we'll be posting updates there. There's a mailing list that people can subscribe to. And obviously, we'll be posting updates on the Twitter account as well.
Okay. And how about your personal, how can they follow you personally?
Yeah, so mine's just at EM, so M for mother, Jade Hames. Well, that's on Twitter and Instagram too.
And is your website up and running?
It is currently up and running. I do need to up and running. Sorry, I currently need to redo it. One of my many things on my to-do list, but it's just emmahames.com.
All right. Well, listen, thank you once again. I know we're going to be working together again soon.
Yes.
And I'm thrilled to launch many, many future creative projects, creative endeavors, and explore those areas. Because
likewise, yeah, I'm really excited because, as we both said, this is serious stuff. It doesn't get much more serious or heavy than this. And I think to be sort of working with other people with a similar mission and doing it in engaging, interesting, might not always be super, super fun, but even the serious stuff is kind of a weird fun when you're discussing it with other people that are sharing that mission. So thank you to you two. And I just wanted to quickly say, your story just touches me every time that I hear it. And you're one of the strongest people I've ever met.
My gosh.
To have endured what you've gone through and just still be here fighting and not just, you've gone through so much and still wanting to stand up to the situation that we know is happening. So.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, you know what? We're in the same fabric, right? I mean, this is what we're doing. We are on the front lines. People, have faith in our fighting gloves, because we're going to do it for you. If you can't find the strength to do it for yourself, we're going to do it for you.
Amen to that.
All right, Emma. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, Jen.
Thanks for listening to Not As Crazy As You Think, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And remember, mental health is attainable for anyone, especially those labeled with mental illness. Until next time, peace out.